The Institute for Faith and Freedom at Grove City College presents Liberty Mail with the Student Fellows of Faith and Freedom.
Welcome back. This is Libby Krieger, and today I'm joined by a very special guest, former Attorney General Barr. So your bio is very extensive. It would probably take me about 5 minutes to read all the great things that you've done. So if you could just start off by telling me a little bit about your background and how you became a two-time Attorney General.
Okay, well, I grew up in Manhattan, right by Columbia University. My parents were at Columbia. I had three brothers. We all went to Columbia eventually. It was during the Cold War. I was born in 1950, and your attention was naturally drawn to international affairs because it seemed that we were always on the verge of war, either in China, with China or with Russia. And so I was interested in international affairs and public affairs. My father was the Republican district leader, so we were sort of always engaged in political discussion. Because my parents were academicians, I really didn't think much about business or going into business. It was really public service. I always was directed at that, or at least initially.
Sounds like you had a very natural trajectory into the public service field. So also looking at your bio, you've worked in the CIA for many years. What are some of the key insights that you took away from that time? Obviously, nothing confidential that you can tell us, but what did you take away?
Well, sure. I mean, one thing I want to say is that I started out with a very clear-cut, sort of rigid plan of what I wanted to do. I wanted to be the director of the CIA. In high school, during my conference with my guidance counselor, he said, "So, what do you think you might want to do?" And I said, "I want to be director of the CIA."
Very specific. Yeah.
He said, "Boy, that's very specific." And it was a short interview because I said, "I want to go to Columbia. I want to become a China expert. Everyone else is an expert on Russia. I want to become a China expert so I can get into the CIA." And that's eventually what I did. But my plans quickly shifted. So one of my bits of advice is don't necessarily stick rigidly to a plan. Be nimble enough to move around and take advantage of opportunities. So interestingly, my mother, being a childhood of the Depression, sort of said, "Well, I don't know about this going into CIA because then you sort of get trapped. Mm-hmm. You become an expert in Chinese military forces. What's the secondary market for that? So you should go to law school." So I decided to satisfy her, and I went to law school at night. I really had not, I was sort of interested in the law, but I really did it to keep her off my back. And I ended up doing very well in law school at night. I was top in my class and so forth. And it just shows you how these things happen. The investigations of the CIA started back in the 70s for so-called abuses, and they didn't have many lawyers, and it took over a year to get a job in the CIA because you had to go through all the background stuff. Mm-hmm. And so I was in the middle of the night law school. They said, "Here, you come here and you help us on these investigations." So I went up to the 7th floor of headquarters, which is where the director's office is, and I was working on the team. And lo and behold, George H.W. Bush just comes from China, being the ambassador to China, to become the head of CIA. And I had contact with him because I would prepare him for hearings and go up to the Hill. And, he knew who I was because I worked on China and he had just come from China and so forth. And so I created, that relationship sprung into being and obviously proved very beneficial down the road. And then when I graduated from law school, I didn't know nothing about the legal profession, and I was very high up in my class, and people said, "You should clerk for a judge." So I clerked for a judge, a very prestigious judge in Washington, federal judge. And he introduced me to people who had worked in the Ford administration. And when Reagan won, they asked me to come over and work on the Reagan transition team. I went into a private law firm. I was in a private law firm at that point. I didn't go back to CIA because the Democrats had won and Bush had left, and they put in someone I didn't respect, Admiral Stansfield Turner. And so I didn't want to go back to the agency. I went into a law firm, worked on the Reagan transition, and then later, after a case I was working on settled, and I was sort of free to leave the firm, I got offered a position at the White House, the Reagan White House, and I went there and worked for a little over a year and a half, and then I decided, I need to go back and make partner at my law firm. That's sort of a ticket you Washington expected you to punch in the private practice. So I went back to my law firm, became a partner, and I helped Bush when he ran for president. And so when he won, actually I helped screen vice presidential potential nominees and helped on the campaign. And when it was over, he asked me to be the Assistant Attorney General for the Office of Legal Counsel, which is called the President's lawyer, because you primarily advise the President on the scope of his powers. And he was very conscious of making sure that there were no further encroachments on executive authority. So that was my first job in the Justice Department, and that's how I sort of went from being a China. I sometimes am struck by the fact that I went from being a China scholar to being the Attorney General, in 17 years or something.
Clearly that didn't trap your career path, yeah.
But, I tell people the common denominator was I found that when you read laws from right to left, they make more sense than when you read them from left to right. Chinese is read from right to left. So.
Okay, that makes sense there. So I want to touch on your time in the Reagan administration. You've worked closely with many presidents. How has your working closely with presidents shaped your understanding of the presidency?
Once I started getting into law school and stuff, I read a lot about presidents and each president. I knew a lot about presidential history. The first president I worked for as president was Reagan. I think Reagan was a remarkable man and president and thinker. Tonight I hope to have a chance to speak about him more. But he was a wonderful, affable guy, but he was a thoughtful guy. He knew how to use power. He spent his capital wisely. When you think of what he was able to accomplish, beating an incumbent president by winning 44 states, winning re-election by 49 states, getting his vice president elected president, and then narrowing the playing field so that even when Clinton came in, his choices of what he could do were limited. He had to reform welfare. He had to pass 2 tough crime bills because of the influence of Ronald Reagan. He essentially put his strong imprint on 20 years of our history. His fluidity in speaking, he was just a great orator and a great, compared to anyone I've seen since. And one of the great things about him is he would allow his people to go out and do the fighting for him initially, and then when it was most important he could deliver, he'd go out, and we'd always say, it's time to bring in the Gipper. That's what we would say at the White House. And each time he'd just, boom, he'd score, and the polls would shift 10 points overnight. Remarkable man. Bush, I had known from the CIA, and he's a very tough-minded guy, but also one of the most considerate gentleman I've ever known. Probably the most considerate person of other people, of anyone I've ever seen at his level. But he wasn't a squish. I mean, he was a tough-minded guy, and he was decisive, and he took responsibility for his decisions and never tried to cast blame when things went wrong. He was the first example. I mean, Trump cries a lot about how he was treated unfairly, and he was treated unfairly, very unfairly, with the Russiagate stuff. But the fact is that, Bush was standing at almost 90% popularity in March of 1991 after the Gulf War, and in 19 months, and the recession had ended. We had 19 months of growth. To read the media, you would have thought we were in a depression. They cooked up this phony scandal about Iraqgate, and it took them 19 months to take him down. But it was another feeding frenzy where the media and the left ganged up against him, and he was the victim of that. But he never cried. He wasn't a crybaby about it. And unlike today, there was no Fox, and there was no social media. There was just no outlet other than the mainstream media. So that was a frustrating time during that time. But I think people are reawakening to his personal accomplishments. He helped bring the Cold War to an end in a way that was great for the United States and our allies, and his performance in the Middle East was unbelievable. So.
Well, it's great to hear such insight from someone who's had such a personal, close relationship with many presidents. So I guess, given all your experiences in law, in the CIA, and the administration, what is your advice to students who are looking to get into policy, government, or law?
I would say don't overplan. Just be sensitive to doors that are open and experience that you can get. I tell people there's always a way to move from point A to point B. People sometimes send their kids to me for advice and they're crushed because, part of their plan had fallen apart. They weren't admitted to this, or they didn't get a good grade in this, or, they were rejected by this employer. And I tell them, forget about it. There's always a strategy. There's always a way to move. And sometimes these rejections are blessings in disguise. So, for example, when I first applied to the CIA, the most prestigious program was called I forgot what it was called, but it was for people who intended to be career people, and you were rotated through different parts of the agency and stuff. That was one way to go in, and the other way to go in was just to be hired by a particular component. And I applied to the prestigious one, and I didn't get in. I was, oh my God, it turned out to be the best thing that happened to me. I'd be in Okinawa right now, listening to Chinese radio broadcasts or something. But so sometimes those doors closing turn into blessings, and you just have to rebound quickly. And get as much experience as you can in different areas, and don't be too rigid. I thought I was going to be a China expert. Then after the government, I got a call from two companies, one General Mills cereal, and the other GTE telephone business. It was a big telecom company, and I didn't know anything about either, but I picked GTE. I said to the head of GTE, I don't know anything about phones. And he said, yeah, but our whole industry is going through radical change. I want somebody who has just good sense and isn't tied to the past. It looks at everything fresh. So he hired me as general counsel, and it was a fantastic experience. I learned a lot about regulation and business and so forth. For 15 years I worked, ending up at Verizon as general counsel. At that time, a lot of people would not have gone in-house, which is going into a corporation. Mm-hmm. At that time, sort of the ethos in Washington law firms was, being a partner in a Washington law firm is cooler than going in-house. But at the time I went in-house as a former attorney general, then people started paying attention. Wait a minute, you can actually make a lot more money in-house with stock options. Lawyers don't understand stock options. But and also you run your own show. You have your own legal team and so forth, and you're the client of the law firms, and it was just a tremendous experience. And then it became the hot thing to do, and so people out of government want to go in-house and become general counsel. So sometimes you just have to not follow the herd and take opportunities as they come.
Yeah, it sounds like you have to see what doors open, what doors close, and then
Right.
take it from there.
Right.
So I know we only have a few minutes left, so I want to end asking about your new book that's coming out. Can you briefly describe what that book is about? And that's being released in March, is that correct?
Yeah, on March 8th.
March 8th.
So the name of the book is One Damn Thing After Another, which is what attorneys general describe the job as. William French Smith was told by President Reagan that he wanted him as attorney general, and he went and talked to Ed Levy, who had been Gerald Ford's attorney general, and who was an academician. He puffed a pipe, had wear bow ties, puffed a pipe, and he had been the head of the University of Chicago. And William French Smith says, so could you tell me about the job of attorney general? And he was expecting Levy to start talking about separation of powers and the rule of law. And he puffed on his pipe. He said, it's one damn thing after another. And that story is told to all attorneys general, and I think everyone agrees that's what the job is. So that's the name of the book. And the publisher called me, asked me to write it. I said, I'm not going to do a tell-all book. He said, we wouldn't want you to do that, but we'd like you to discuss your career, but maybe spend about 70% of the time on Trump. So that's what I do. I talk a little bit about, growing up on the Upper West Side and how I got into the government and my trajectory through the government. And then I have some about my experiences in the Bush administration, where I was Assistant Attorney General, Deputy Attorney General, and then Attorney General. And then a short chapter about my time in private practice, and then about 70% of the book is Trump. And what I try to do is I describe, why Trump was elected, my experience with him, what I thought of him, the trajectory of our relationship, and I discuss Russiagate and dealing with Russiagate and the Mueller report and all that. But then and the impeachment process, and then I have 7 or 8 chapters on various legal areas of law that are still hot issues today, and were even hot issues long ago, which is violent crime, Mexican cartels and the drug war, big tech, religious liberty, Chinese espionage and and anti-terrorism activities, and COVID and some other things. And then I deal with the last year of the administration and the election period and then the post-election period. So it's
Sounds like
500. It's over 500 pages.
Sounds like a fascinating survey through your
I don't know.
career.
I hope it is.
And now you can add author to your long resume too. So
Right. I never thought I'd write a book, but people persuaded me that having worked for 3 presidents, and also being someone who supported President Trump. I was not a never Trumper. I supported President Trump, and I went in and helped his administration. That I would come with a perspective that might be useful at this point. So that's why I wrote it.
Great. Well, we'll be looking forward to seeing that on March 8th. Thank you so much for taking the time and
Thank you very
speaking with
much.
us today.
It's been good.
We'll hope to have you back here at Grove City College soon.
Sure. Thanks. Bye.
For more information on this podcast or other programs, please visit faithandfreedom.com.